Following on from our previous video, we are going to continue with responses. A common thing you'll want to do in your application is redirect the user to another page. This is a common thing to do in Laravel. For example, if a user has not completed the form correctly and you want to redirect the user back to the form page. Or maybe the user doesn't have the correct credentials to view that page. Either way, redirects are a useful thing. We can perform a redirect using the redirect helper method. Here we see that when the user visits the page dashboard, they are redirected to the home/dashboard page. This was probably done as an example of a page that existing users are still visiting, but you've changed the endpoint, the URL for the dashboard. A very useful feature is being able to redirect the user back to a form they have completed, but for some reason, maybe they have entered something incorrect, you need to redirect them back. You can use the back helper method using the with input method to pass back the information the user submitted. Even if you are not using the with input method, I would be tempted to use the back method when redirecting back to a page, because it's very easy for a developer to understand what's going on by just reading the code. Imagine you've opened up a big Laravel project and you've read the lines back. It instantly tells the developer that the user gets redirected to the previous page. But with the redirect helper method, it tells the developer you are redirecting the user and it doesn't provide much more information than that. You can use the redirect method, of course, but I would recommend using the back helper method when you want to send the user back to where they came from and redirect for everything else. We've already touched upon using name routes and why it's a good thing, but it's also worth noting that you can use them in redirects. So if a page's URL changes, like dashboard, you don't have to go through all your code hunting for those changes because it's being matched by the name. We've mentioned in the last video that you could just return JSON by returning an array, which is fine for small applications, but you really want to use the response object with the JSON method. This does the same thing as returning an array, but with two big advantages. One, it's explicit using the JSON method and tells any developer, yep, we are returning JSON. And two, we can chain methods onto the response object like cookies and headers and etc. Also worth mentioning is the file downloads. This is useful for telling browsers that the data we are sending is a download. This basically sets some headers in the background telling the browser, don't display this data, present it as a download. A final thing I want to talk about in this video is using response macros. A very useful feature of Laravel that allows you to make common use cases available to your application. Here we'll implement the Laravel example of making a caps method for the response object. Let's create a service provider using Laravel's artisan command. PHP artisan make provider response macro service provider. Now that we've created our provider, we need to tell Laravel about it. Within the config app file, there is a section called application service providers. Let's add our new service provider to this list. Great. Now, let's add our response macro from the Laravel documentation. This basically allows us to chain the caps method onto the response object. If we'd named this macro orange, then the method would, of course, be called orange. Let's add a quick route to our routes file, and let's add the response helper method with the caps method and see what we get. As expected, we get all the text in uppercase. This is a very simple example, but you could see how this could be useful for doing a lot of repetitive tasks. This covers the response video. Have a read of the documentation, try everything covered there, and then move on to take the quiz in the next section.